Hey guys, welcome to the third class in our series of Python, and today we're going to be talking about functions, classes, and objects. So a function is a definition of a set of instructions that can be repeated, and it's meant to reduce code repetition. So you put an input into the function, and then it outputs another value. Let's take a closer look at this screen on the right. In the very first line, we define my function with the parameter word, highlighted in orange. Then we return the string hello plus the parameter word, which essentially concatenates them. Then we print the returned value of my function in this statement. This will print hello Safin. In a function, the def keyword is used to define a function. The function name immediately succeeds it, as shown in the example here, highlighted in blue. Parameters are passed within the function call and are separated by commas. So for example, if you wanted to add another parameter, you would add word, comma, and then the name of the next parameter. Finally, the return keyword exits the function and is inserted in the place of the function call. So whatever is returned in here shows up in here, which outputs whatever is returned by the function. Here are some more examples. In this one, the name of the function is called sum, and it takes in two parameters called num1 and num2. Then, a variable called val is assigned to the sum of these two numbers. Finally, we return the string of this val. If we were to print the sum of 1 and 3, it would return 4. Here's another function that we called r. It has a parameter called num. Then, in the array variable, there's an array with the values 1, 2, 3, and num. Finally, it returns the array. So if we were to print this array, it would print an array containing the values 1, 2, 3, and 4 as shown here. Next, we'll talk about classes and objects. Classes and objects are used in object-oriented programming languages to define structures. It's extremely useful for modular programming, and objects are essentially just instances of classes. As you can see here, an input is put into my class, and then you can apply many different functions to it. Let's take a closer look. In the first line, we initialize my class with the parameter word. Then we have a def init, which creates an initial function that runs whenever the object is created. Here we can see that the object has the parameters self and word, and defines self.word as word. Then there's another function called printer, which has the parameter self. This function prints self.word. Here we can see an object being created, with the word being Safin. Then we run the printer function of the class. Now you may be thinking, why is this self keyword showing up everywhere? Functions must include the self parameter to use class-wide variables. Essentially, it utilizes a scope for variables in the class. They're typically defined in the init function, which runs when an object is created. As you can see here, the init function has the word parameter, and it assigns self.word equal to the parameter word. Then, the printer can access this because it's in the same scope. Briefly, let's talk about modules. Modules include a set of functions and classes that can be called from your program. You can install modules with the pip command. For example, if you wanted to import the numpy module, you could use import numpy as np. Essentially, what this is doing is importing all of the functions and classes from numpy, and you're allowing it to use the namespace np. So for example, if we wanted to use numpy's cosine function, which is a mathematical function, we could print np.cosine2, and that'll output this number. Let's do some activities. The first one we're going to do is do a number guesser. It must generate a random number from 1 through 10, take a user input for the user's guess of the number, and check whether the guess is correct. I have VS Code open here, and I'm just going to start writing some pseudocode. The first thing that we need to do is to generate a random number from 1 through 10. The way that we'll do this is using the random module. We'll import it using import random. Then we can generate a random number by using random.randint, and then specifying a range between the number If we wanted to print this value, we can just wrap this in print. I'll save it, open up a terminal, and then run this file with python3 main.py. Here you can see it generated a random number between 1 and 10, which is 9. If I were to do this again, it would generate another random number, and so on. The next part is to take user input for the user's guess of the number. So the way that we would probably have to do that is say there would be some sort of input that would get the user's input and store it as a variable. So it would be something like the guess is equal to some input like that. And then we also have to check whether the guess is correct. And the way that we'll do that is using logic. So we'll use an if statement, which checks if the two values are equal. So if the random number and the guess are equal, so if the random equals the guess, then we should probably say that they were correct. Now to implement this, we'll have to make a couple changes. The first of which is to add this into a variable. That's the only way we'll be able to add it right here. So I'm going to define a variable called random, or just rand, so it doesn't conflict with the module name. And it's going to be the same thing, random.randint between 1 and 10. And we're going to actually just use exactly this to get user input. So you could say guess and have the user enter their value. Whatever they enter will be stored in this guess variable. Finally, this part is done for us. If random is equal to guess, it'll print hello. Now we can just save the file and run it. However, this will give us an error. If you noticed, the guess is a string and random is actually an integer. The way for us to convert it is to use int. Now, we probably won't guess this on the first try, but I'm just going to go ahead and print rand up here so that we know what it is and we can guess the correct answer. Unfortunately, it didn't work. And the reason for that is because we didn't add this variable up here. So we just need to replace this variable name. There we go. So that's essentially how that program would work. And remember, debugging is a very essential feature, which is why I included this print statement up here. You can comment it out using the hashtag. We're going to move on to the next activity. And this one's a little bit more complicated. It's going to be the area of any geometric shape. We're going to start with circles, rectangles, squares, or triangles, but the easiest of which is the square. So it would probably look something like this. You'd probably have to define any function, so function, and you probably enter the number of sides. So function, and then the parameters would be number of sides, and then it would compute the value of the area based on an if statement. For example, if the number of sides is 4, it should probably return the side length times or squared. And the way that we do that in Python is using these two multiplication operators. And we need to pass in the side length as a parameter. So now that we have our pseudocode ready, let's go ahead and implement this function. I'm just going to create a function using def and then name it. We should name it area. So we can name it area right here, and then we can pass in the number of sides and the length as both of the parameters, and there we are. Now we can just write an if statement saying that if the length, or if the number of sides is equal to 4, then return or the length actually, squared. We can test this out using a function call. So here we can see that we need num for the first argument. So if the number of sides is 4 and the length is 9. We can run this file with python3 main.py, and we did not get any output. This is because we did not attach a print statement to our function call. There we go. So a 4-sided figure, which would be a square, with a side length of 9, has an area of 81, which is 9 times 9. We can also consider different shapes. So for example, you can write an else and return, for example, if you were to do, oops, let's go back here. If we were to do a circle, we'd probably have to do length, and the area of a circle is pi r squared. So if we're given the radius, then we can do times pi squared. Now, Python does not know what pi is because it does not have that number built in. The way we're going to add that is by using an import statement. So for example, we'll import math here, and it replace pi with math.py. Pi is a constant in the math library, which is built into Python. Now, there's one thing we also need to change. So else will only return the value if all of the previous conditions are false. However, we want to target a specific condition. We want to target if num is equal to 0, meaning that it has no sides or infinite sides, whichever you prefer, for a circle. So if we wanted to get the area of a circle with radius 9, that's what the area would approximately be. Let's do a quick recap. Today we talked about functions, classes, and objects. A function defines a set of instructions that can be repeated. Classes are used in object-oriented programming to define structures, and they're extremely useful for modular programming. Objects are instances of classes. Some next steps for your Python development could include game creation, AI and data analysis, as well as scripting and web development. Popular libraries for these include Pygame, and for AI and data analysis, PyTorch, NumPy, etc. Scripting is referring to the automation of certain tasks. So if you would like to automate tasks, scripting is for you. And finally, web development. You can use a program called Flask, which allows you to serve static sites using Python. All right, that's it. Thank you very much for watching.